Chapter 5. Wait, Darmere, Fristel called. I thought doppelgangers had to kill their victims and eat the brain to shapeshift to a new form. How could he hope that Marist was still alive? Only unskilled doppelgangers are such, Darmere answered. Those that are practiced can shapeshift just by studying the form they wish to mimic. He nodded. Your assumption, however, is correct about most doppelgangers. If that's true, then how could he have known that didn't happen and Marist was still alive? Jan asked. Darmere looked at the fair-headed young man. Had the doppelganger killed Marist and feasted on her brain, it would have gained her exact memory and nature. Had that been the case, it would have acted quite differently to having been called cute. He smiled. Much differently. At daybreak, Aleph wandered through the night's battleground. Dead goblins lay scattered about. Beheaded zombies totaled 3 after he destroyed one that was impaled. There were a few badly charred corpses, probably the human bodies of werewolves. Then he found what he sought. One of the goblins that had attacked during the night was still alive, hanging upside down from one foot caught in a tree snare that Aleph and Marist set before the battle. It struggled vainly to get free. "Kill you, human!" it snarled as Aleph approached. "This I shall do when I get loose." Aleph smirked at the empty threat, watching the goblin struggle even harder to free itself. "You shall feed the vultures if you don't." He leaned against a tree. "You know, I once saw someone staked to a tree because he would not tell his captors what they wanted to know. The vultures were allowed to feed on him while he was still alive." He gave the goblin a thoughtful look. "I'll always remember the scream he gave when the vulture plucked out his left eye and swallowed it in one gulp." The goblin sneered back. "I will be rescued before then, human." Once the man screamed himself silent, the same vulture bit off his tongue. Of course the poor wretch passed out from that. As you may guess, his captors would not have that. They threw strong brine on him to wake him. Aleph slapped a tree as if killing an insect. Then he studied his hand. The vultures left after a while, but the ants remained. They slowly ate the wounds the vultures made. After a while, they got into the man's body and began eating him from the inside out. It was a very painful way to die. He shrugged. Then again, he never told his captors what they wanted to know. The goblin tried to spit upward. "Nor shall I say anything to you." He nodded. "As you wish." He walked to the saddlebag on his horse and dug into it. The goblin watched with great interest as Aleph removed something from his pack and returned to the tree. He held up a small glass bottle tightly wrapped in leather for the goblin to see. "What you do?" the goblin asked. "Torture me with acid or poison? I still won't talk, no matter what you do." Aleph removed the stopper and smiled as he poured some of the thick amber liquid on the goblin's face. It took one whiff of the fluid that slowly flowed past its nostrils and cheeks towards its eye. "Why you pour honey on me?" Aleph smiled and shrugged. "In case the ants find you before the vultures. This way, instead of wasting time looking for an opening, they will follow the honey trail and crawl through your nose." He cast a disinterested gaze into the woods, as if searching for something. "Unless some sweet-toothed bear comes by first, that is." He looked at the goblin, as if remembering something. "But then you said you would be rescued soon, didn't you?" He walked toward his horse without a backward glance. "Perhaps you know Brookestone better than I do." The goblin said nothing as Aleph mounted his horse. He gradually guided it through the forest at a slow pace, watching the trail. He said, "Enjoy the remainder of the day, goblin. I shall leave you to your silence and your new-found forest friends, whatever they be." The goblin tried again to free its foot from the noose. Watching the man ride off, it looked at the dense brambles. "Wait, human! I shall talk!" Aleph reined in his horse and nodded. "I thought you might." An hour and a half later, he stood before one of the many deep crevices found along the gray rocks of the spine of Korath. The foul smell of death issued from it, but it was not the only indication that he had. It was the correct one. Tied to a branch near the entrance was a strip of tanned leather, which he recognized as belonging to Marist's clothing. Brookestone was expecting him. Aleph drew Windgazer and walked to the entrance, finally stepping into the crevice. Near the opening was a torch of pine fat, already lit, and setting in a holder mounted on the rock wall. From the length of blackened wood on the end, he knew it had been lit only moments earlier. He frowned, sheathed Windgazer, and took a torch as he continued downward into the rocky darkness. Despite the possibility of some undead creature lying in wait just beyond the torchlight, he continued at a steady pace. If the darkness before him held some foul creature, he would know soon enough, but he doubted it. Brookestone was evidently waiting for him. He walked cautiously for several minutes, watching for traps. The only sound was the crunch of loose gravel underfoot. Up ahead, some distance away, he saw the yellow flickering of two more torches mounted on either side of the passageway. Squinting, he saw a form under each. As he came closer, he saw the two forms were human skeletons, each with a wrist manacled to the torch holder above it. Neither moved or carried weapons, looking as if they were just two victims who had been chained there to die ages earlier. He slowly walked between them, ready to use his torch if needed. With evil such as Brookestone, anything could be dangerous. His anticipation was well founded. Both skeletons reached for him with their free hands. One solid punch to the ribcage collapsed the skeleton on the left. The skull of the other broke like a clay pot when he smashed the torch against its forehead. Either Brookestone was short on troops, or he forgot with whom he was dealing. Even armed skeletons would have been no match for Aleph. The dark tunnel stretched down and lengthwise for some distance. The end was finally near. He saw a faint firelight ahead and heard an echo of low voices. As he neared, he saw the light came from a series of bonfires in a large cavern, with one large fire in the center. Smoke rose slowly, drifting gently toward a rocky outcropping that must have been a natural vent connecting to the surface. Around the fires were various forms, mostly two-legged humanoids, though some paced restlessly on four legs. Those must either be werewolves or wolven. No matter what they were, he did not relish the thought of being trapped in their midst. Since he had no choice, he drew his sword and stepped into the cavern to face a group of living and undead creatures. He watched those that came near. He sought only two, his love so he could free her, and Brookestone so he could destroy him. One of the human-shaped forms walked away from the large fire and showed itself to be a tall man dressed in fine clothes of light brown pants and a long-sleeved white silk shirt. "Well, there you are, old friend," Brookestone said, stepping forward. "I thought you would have been killed in some unimportant battle by now. I am pleased to see I was wrong." The vampire stopped 10 feet away and gave Aleph a courteous bow. "Now, my once friend and companion knight stands before me, with a drawn sword, no less. Come to save the day, as a knight of the land should. Will you never learn that the old ways are gone?" Ignoring the vampire, he glanced around. Various foul creatures formed a circle around the two of them. Most were goblins, probably 2 or 3 score, armed with a variety of weapons. 2 packs of wolven paced the center, probably as many as 20, along with an equal number of Brookstone's vampiric underlings. A fourth of that number of shambling undead zombies made up the rest of the group. It was a formidable army. Nonetheless, he knew Brookestone would boast for some time before ordering them to attack. One thing Aleph had in his favor was the low intelligence of all the creatures. All he had to do was play the game. For a start, he sheathed his sword. "Quite a group I've collected, isn't it?" Brookstone asked proudly, his pronounced canine teeth showing as he watched Aleph study the army. He had seen his former companion charge to the rescue, but with his sword sheathed, he seemed resigned. That was disappointing. "Where is she?" He turned his full attention back to the vampire. Brookstone had not aged a bit since Aleph saw him last. He was still tall and thin, his face the same, as was the frosting of white against the black hair on both sides of his forehead. Now, old friend. Manners, if you please. I understand you no longer call yourself a knight, nor even use your actual name." "A knight is something you never were, not a true one. What need have I of being a knight of the land, at the beck and call of some pompous lord? One doesn't gain power that way." "Power?" Aleph asked in disgust. "Power to do what? Betray those you called companions? Power to kill a child who was in your charge? Ha! Companions? What does one with power need with companions or friends? When one has power, one doesn't need such trivial things." Aleph frowned. "Trivial things like loyalty and honor, you mean?" "Loyalty to whom? I'm the one who commands loyalty now, rather than give it. Loyalty from those who know no better. They fear you because they don't know who you truly are, or how much of a coward you are, despite whatever powers you might have. Even now, Brookstone, you quake with fear of me." "In fear of you? Why should I do such? Especially when I have a prisoner, someone who gives me all the power over you that I need. If you have hurt her, it will be the last thing you do in this world." Brookstone stepped back with a look of exaggerated fear. "Truly? My, how dangerous you've become in your old age, not to mention ill-mannered. What does your code say about threatening an unarmed foe like myself? For you, I will make an exception." Brookstone smiled and motioned behind him. "Fear not, old friend. I take good care of my guests." Two underlings escorted a struggling elf into Aleph's sight. "Are you all right?" Seeing her clothing had been torn in various places, he studied her for any sign of injury. Brookstone raised a hand as if signaling the elf to remain silent. "She hasn't been hurt, knight." He motioned the underlings to step back, without Marist. He walked toward her to study her face, running a long fingernail under her chin and upward to the point of one ear. "The truth is, old friend, I have yet to figure out what to do with this lovely morsel. Should I make her one of my concubines, or simply take a bite from that delicious-looking neck and feed her to my followers?" The crowd cheered at their master's dark humor. The less intelligent of them savored the thought of a fresh meal. Aleph gave him a narrow stare, then nodded toward Marist. "You may found that you have more than you bargained for." His grim tone belied no falsehood. The vampire laughed and gave a look of mock surprise. "Oh, you mean her magic!" He lifted a pewter-colored pendant from between her breasts, a dark red sparkle of light in its crystal center. Brookstone smiled with a cold evil as he spoke. This ended that threat. Even so, I lost several of my loyal followers before they managed to get around her lovely neck. "Just what do you want, Brookstone?" Aleph tired of the game of words. He hoped Marist would be able to help him with her magic, but that was not possible. It was up to him and his skill after all. "To the point, as usual," the vampire frowned. "You never change, do you? Still trying to save the innocent." He licked his lips. "Very well. What I want is you, my former companion in arms, for old time's sake. Let her free, and you can do whatever you want with me." He spoke without emotion, having expected the demand. An evil smile formed at Brookstone's lips. The tips of his canines rested against his lower lip. "I already have you," he said coldly. He motioned grandly at the elf's form. "Why should I give up this darling creature for what I already have?" "Because if you don't let her go, I'll thin out this motley bunch of yours, and chop you into so many parts that it will take a cave slime years to find enough to eat. He rested his hand on Windgazer's hilt, looking at the gathered creatures. You know my skill, Brookestone. This mongrel collection of yours is beneath me. Several of the goblins shifted uneasily. Some clutched their weapons. A few had witnessed Alf's fighting skill the previous night and knew he was not bluffing. The serious tone of the threat made Brookstone's smile fade. He knew the man he faced could kill many of his followers before they killed him. He also knew there was a real possibility that he might feel the bite of Alf's sword before his followers brought him down, if they could manage it in time. He grabbed a handful of Marist's hair and tipped her head back to expose her neck. She would be the first to die, and I would still have you. She may well be the first, but you would be the second. Alf removed his hand from the sword hilt. It's not my body you want to conquer. You would have done that last night. You want my soul, don't you? Let her go free and safe, and I'll stay here and follow you. Marist opened her mouth to shout, but Brookestone put a hand on her throat to silence her. Very interesting proposition, knight. How do I know you would carry out the deal if I agree? Alf stood up straighter. You have my word as a knight. I shall follow your orders if she is allowed to go free and safe from your evil. The words were spoken between gritted teeth. I want no more innocent blood spilled. Brookestone smiled broadly as he looked at Marist's features. You actually care for this elf woman, don't you? I have never known you to have much time for engaged romance, nor any desire for one. Getting lonely in your old age, are you? Were you no longer able to stand the night stretched out endlessly with no one to share your bed? I care for her more than my life, he said sincerely, looking into Marist's eyes. Something any man would understand. But then, that's always been your problem, hasn't it? You never were a man to begin with. Now you are even less of one. Brookestone smiled, unaware of the effect of the insults on his followers and their perception of his leadership. Instead, he studied Marist's features with greater interest. I have never had an elf wench before. I understand they are indeed something special. By your posturing, that must be true. I already surmised she was important to you. That's why I sent my doppelganger last night. I thought it would bring you here. How did you discover its identity? Alf allowed himself a grin, inward smile, though his tone was emotionless and straightforward. It enjoyed being called cute too much. Brookestone frowned, looking at the elf in confusion. You don't like being called cute? An evil grin formed on his face. While you're as adorable as a newborn babe. Marist grimaced in anger and broke free long enough to land a knee solidly in the vampire's groin. The thrust was strong enough to lift him off the ground slightly, and the placement would have laid a normal man low for hours. Instead, he backhanded her. Were I a living man, that would have hurt, he said angrily. All you've done, elf, is incur my wrath. Brookestone! Alf called, seeing his fingers curl around Marist's throat. Are you still so much of a coward that you fight only those who have no chance to defend themselves? First a helpless girl, and now a helpless woman. At least you moved up somewhat. I suppose that vaulted vampiric power has done you some good after all. That caused another stir in the ranks. That time Brookestone noticed. It cast Alf an angry look when he saw how easily the taunt disrupted his army of followers. Most were mindless enough to follow the strongest individual who presented himself as their leader. Such was the flaw in their loyalty, but then they were easily cowed with fear. Brookestone released his hold on Marist's throat, nearly twisting her neck with deadly force. In rage, he said, I should just throw you to the wolven and be done with you. Alf smiled. That was the response he wanted. Marist may have paid for the taunt and pain, but if he could anger Brookestone into foolish action, they might have a chance. As I said, Brookestone, you have not got the courage to face someone who can defeat you in battle, vampire powers or not. When we last parted, you did not have the courage to face me. Instead, you struck me from behind so you could prey on one who was practically a babe. You always were a coward. Here I thought the stench of the cave came from your companions, but now I think it comes from you. Do you need to change your clothing before we continue? Brookestone snarled and shoved Maris to the ground, stepping toward Aleph with his lip curled back to reveal his white canine teeth and their deadly promise. The elf can go free for now. I will enjoy hunting her myself to make her mine. As for you, knight, I will enjoy making this last a long, painful time. Maris ran to Aleph's side and drew a silver dagger from inside her boot, determined to stand and fight beside the man she loved. Aleph put his hand on her arm and lowered it, turning his head enough to catch her gaze. Get out of here now, he said grimly. This time, do as I say. She hesitated, then she nodded, pausing only long enough to kiss Aleph before running from the cavern into the tunnel that led outside. You can't defeat me, knight, Brookestone snarled, walking closer. I have the strength of 10. Cut me, and I live. Stab me, and I will still come for you. How can you defeat me? You are immortal, while I am an immortal god. She's free, Brookestone. Aleph tipped his head back toward the tunnel. With a grim smile, he said, That was all I cared about. Brookestone stopped and nodded. Clever thinking, knight. His calm voice filled with understanding. You were goading me, trying to make me angry enough to attack, so you would not have to honor your oath. As you say, he felt disappointed that Brookestone figured out his plan. Fortunately, he had other things in mind. The vampire smiled. She's free now, knight. By your oath, you must obey me. I will enjoy watching you make your first kill. I promise to make sure it's the most helpless innocent I can find. Perhaps a fair-haired young girl? That would be fitting, would it not? I spit on you, Brookestone, Aleph said defiantly. You aren't worthy of any oath I give. The vampire's eyes narrowed. You would break your solemn word? That was something you would never have done, knight, no matter if it cost you your life. Aleph gritted his teeth at the truth of those words, but he was determined to carry out his plan. He reached into his shirt to bring out a frosted glass sphere of pulsing yellow light. In a serious tone he said, You forget, Brookestone, I'm no longer a knight. Things change. He threw the sphere against a rock ceiling. With a blinding glare, white light exploded, causing screams and howls of pain from all inside the cavern, except him. Wind gazers sang through the air as Aleph cut through the pained creatures around him. The silvered blade became a blur of light as magical steel sliced into and through everything in his path. Those creatures that had been alive were alive no longer. The undead members of Brookstone's followers became just so many scattered parts of flesh. When the light from the sun sphere finally faded, only Aleph and Brookestone remained whole. He strode toward the weakened vampire, waiting for Brookestone to look up with painfully red, hate-filled eyes. His face was as burned as someone who had been in the desert for days due to the magical light. What I did to your followers was for Maris and the villagers of Lihe. What I do to you will be for Willa. You always said you were above taking revenge, Brookestone said in an anguished tone. He had underestimated his one-time companion, and he was too weakened by the sun sphere to defend himself. True, but for you, I will make an exception. His tone was as cold as death. The sword struck the vampire with precision. Brookestone wailed in pain as both arms were severed at the shoulder, followed by his legs being separated at the hips. He fell to the cold cavern floor in agony. The limbless vampire looked up at the man with his posed blade. Pain and rage filled his eyes as he snarled, Go ahead, damn you! Finish it! Aleph shook his head and sheathed his sword. It is finished. You caused the death of an innocent girl so you become an undying power. For her, I leave you to enjoy your deserved immortality. He strode from the cavern as the helpless immortal cursed him for all eternity, while being subject to the slow digestion of any cave slime that came by. Mare stood at the cave entrance. The hindering pendant was gone, but it would take many hours before she gained enough magic for even a simple spell. Her sword was ready should anything but Aleph emerge from the darkness. Seeing a shadowed figure coming toward her, she took a defensive posture. Then, with a cry of joy of recognition, she rushed forward and threw her arms around Aleph as he walked into the open air. They held each other without speaking for several moments. Eventually, she loosened her hold and looked into the forbidding tunnel. What a brookstone! Aleph glanced into the darkness, then turned and shook his head. He will never bother anyone again. He told me what happened to you and about Willa. Her eyes watered slightly. I am sorry. I had no idea your life had such pain. He gently closed her lips with his fingers before wiping away a tear that traveled down her cheek. He nodded toward the cave and said, That was a chapter from my past. It's closed now. He lowered his head and he whispered, And at peace. Then it's time that we write some new chapters together, she said, kissing his hand and gazing deep into his eyes. Happier chapters. They walked down the mountain together into a new day, and a continuation of the love bond they shared.